Most people think buying a home is just a financial decision, but for a lot of people, it ends up being one of the most meaningful decisions they ever make, and it has nothing to do with the numbers. Welcome back to another episode of Closing the Deal. I am one of your hosts, Sam Enright, and sitting across from me today is my co-host, Zach Dixon. And today, guys, we are talking about something a little bit different. Wanted to bring a little bit more of a positive light onto buying a home and how it typically ends up being one of the most impactful decisions that most people make in their life. And so really wanted to kind of break that down, give some real world examples of clients that we've helped, and just kind of dive into, that side of it a little bit more. So Zach, what's going on today, man? How are you?
Oh, cannot complain at all. Cannot complain. Excited about this episode because, like you mentioned, so far this year, we've talked a lot about preparation, getting ready to go and what the things do you need to be looking out for when you're ready to start buying a home, and haven't really touched on the kind of more exciting part of, getting closed, getting the keys, moving in, and what comes all with that. So yeah, dude, definitely super excited for today's episode, and hopefully we have a little bit more of a, excited feel to the episode as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely something that's been, I don't know, just spoke to me, when sitting down trying to, figure out what we were going to record next. And I thought this would be a great way to kind of supplant into what we have, recorded so far this year and what we've put out so far this year for everybody. So wanted to shine a light on maybe a little bit more of the positives that come along with buying a home, and just how exciting of a journey it actually is, once you, kind of get through that initial process of the stress and all of that and actually get in the home. So,
And that's kind of, like that's just anything with life. There's going to be ebbs and flows. You're going to have negatives and positives, and not necessarily like preparation is a negative per se, but that's probably not the most fun part of the process as a whole. You know what I mean? And so it's just, I think the positives are much more enjoyed when you go through some trials and tribulations, or, have things that you kind of get through, obstacles that you get through. The positives and the achievements are much more enjoyed when you have those things. So yeah, and definitely applies here in buying your own home as well.
yeah, for sure. It's what we've talked about is definitely the least glamorous part of the entire process. There is a lot that goes into it, and but the reward at the end is that much sweeter, obviously, when you do go through those, like you mentioned, just kind of different things that go into buying a home. So, I guess getting started here, when people generally think about buying a home, I think that this is probably a large place as to where people start with. And that is, what are the numbers going to look like? Interest rates, the money that's going to be required out of pocket, i.e., my down payment, and then the process, right? Those are all of the major main components that go into actually getting financing for a home, actually going out, finding a home, putting in a contract offer, those sort of things, right? But it plays such a small role because when you actually sit back and think about it, you may be in that process for what, 30 days to 6 months, to find your home, to get in a contract, to get the home purchased. But, after that, you're talking 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 years in that home, right? So that little segment of 30 to, 180 days is going to feel very, very small by comparison, comparative to the next 3, 4, 5 years of your life that you're going to spend in the home. So those things are definitely important, but that's not necessarily all what buying is about. There's actually more that goes into it, which I'm sure most people, that's not breaking anybody's thought process there to say, but still it's a good reminder, to kind of get away from the math of it all a little bit and kind of step back from the interest rates and the programs and the down payments and all those different things, right? And focus on what is the bigger picture here. And that is, that I am going to own this home, and kind of have free reign to do whatever it is that I want to do with it.
Yeah, all the things that go into that of owning the home, the pride and the, everything that really just goes into it that we'll touch on here later in the episode. But again, it's just I think that obviously, and we've touched on it in previous episodes, that's the reason why the math is kind of at the forefront is because it's such a large financial purchase. And when people see the down payment amounts, see the closing cost amounts, see the total cash amounts to the table, like obviously that's going to be at the forefront of your brain, and so I think that was a good point there that you made is, it's a very small blip on the radar in the grand scheme of things. As soon as you kind of proceed through those, get the closing, get your keys. Like that's where the real fun starts, as we've mentioned. You get to do
Yeah.
pretty much anything that you want, but you just kind of have to get through some of those monotonous, not as fun tasks, and get your home, get your keys, get your clothes. So
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of takes us into, maybe expanding upon that a little bit, right? So in your opinion, what are some things that change? Once let's put the process aside, let's put the searching for homes, let's put all that aside, and let's say, okay, hey, I purchased my home. Now I'm actually living in it. What are some things that change that maybe is different from obviously, putting down a deposit on a place to rent? You go in and you rent it, and now this is your own home. So, what do you typically see there?
I think the biggest one, as I just mentioned, is going to be pride in the ownership. Like just having something that is yours. And ultimately, it's a kind of double-edged sword with the large financial purchase, right? It's really daunting up front and really kind of maybe scary up front. But then when you purchase it and realize that you own an asset that's worth, 200, 250, $300,000, like kind of putting that into perspective. Obviously, you owe a mortgage on it, but typically, you're going to have equity based on the amount of money that you put down as well. And obviously, as we've talked about previously, that the home prices are appreciating. And so every year, all the time period that you stay in that home, the price of the home is appreciating and you're gaining equity based on that. And so kind of to be able to just sit back and see that equity grow on paper, you're going to have a sense of pride in that. Also with the physical of the home as well, being able to show off its features to your friends and family, to your neighbors, that's just going to have a sense of pride, keeping it in well maintained condition. You just feel, that you have something that is yours, and this large, financial purchase has paid off in the fact that I own this property. It is mine and nobody can take it away from me unless I don't make my mortgage payments. You know what I mean? So, um, it's just, I think that's going to be the biggest one, all in all, honestly. And that is something that I've experienced firsthand, making sure that my landscaping is looking nice, making sure the exterior of the home is upkept and well maintained. That's just, you come home and you look around and take a look at the house, and it's just like, hey, I need to go do that on the weekend to make it look a little bit better, or doing upgrades as a whole and making it just kind of, number one, yours, but number two, just a little bit nicer on the exterior as well. And so I think that that's going to be really the biggest one, is pride in the home ownership on multiple different fronts, whether it's, the financial side or whether it's the actual physical of the home itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Great points there. It brings so much up for me there, just like all of the different things that I've seen and all the conversations that I've had with different clients. And they're excited. We just had a closing yesterday, and just talking with the lady that we closed with, and she's like, oh yeah, I'm going over to the flooring company and they're going to come out and we're going to figure out new floors to put in there. And it's just like, as soon as she's in, right, there's just automatically this, hey, I want to upgrade this, I want to take care of this, I want to do this, you know what I'm saying? And it's a different feeling. And I don't know, for me, it just gives me some excitement. I don't, maybe that's not for everybody. Maybe some people just want to move in and take the home as is and call it a day. But I look at my parents and all of the work that they've done on their house. I remember when we moved in and we rented that place when I was 13 years old, and then they end up purchasing it, and just how far along the journey it's come, and all the different things. It doesn't, yes, exterior wise, it basically looks like the same house, but you go inside and just, things are so much different. I just think that that's such a cool part of the process, right? For most people, is just, getting to fix things and upgrade them to your liking. And we just get to have those conversations, all the time with clients who are always looking to do that sort of stuff. So definitely a big one there.
And
Yeah.
and honestly, you know, have to stroke a check for some of those things, like it's not as necessarily like daunting, because when you get done with it, you're like, oh, I have something to show for it. You know what I mean? Like it's something that I'm going to be able to enjoy over a period of time, or whatever it may be, or like even if it's like sweat equity and you do it yourself and you feel just a sense of pride of making that happen, seeing it from start to finish. It's just, there's really no other feeling like it. I can wholeheartedly attest to that. So
Yeah. And I mean that we're not even going into the part of, what part of what you're doing is actually going to increase the value on the home as well. So,
hmm
you're writing a check for something that potentially has a higher ROI than your initial investment as well. So there's that part of it as well. Excuse me. So obviously a lot there when it comes to, I mean, in basic words, what we're saying is you're having your own space. You're having complete control over everything that happens inside of there. So, that is a really cool feature over, owning a home. And then, some of the other things that we obviously see and, you know, personally I think are great benefits is stability, routines, right? Having that space to be your own, creating a stable environment for yourself, whether you're owning a home by yourself or whether you're married, whether you have kids, whether, whatever the case may be, living with friends, family, the whole nine. Obviously, we see all kinds of different situations, but, having that stability in there, being able to create your home routines and the different things that you do, and just having that sense of home and that sense of pride, like you talked about.
yeah, stability is a big one, because working in property management, I've seen time and time again, you know, people have been renting a single family home. They have pretty much made it theirs, other than the fact that they don't own it. You know what I mean? Like they have lived there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years in a row, and then their owner decides to sell it, and you know the new owner wants to come in and remodel it and rehab it, and they unfortunately have to move. And so like that, it's just you don't have the stability in the renting factor. You know what I mean? Like and in theory, you know, even if you have a lease and you've lived there for 15, 20 years of your life and you've made it your home, in theory that could be all taken away from you within a 3-6 month time frame. And so that the stability one is a big thing, that again, you can't have that home taken away from you unless you fail to hold up your end of the bargain on the mortgage side.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Well, that takes us, I know we kind of touched on it a little bit there, but, expanding a little bit more on the emotional side and, kind of the things that change, obviously I would say that, what we spoke about, pride, right? Pride is going to drive an emotion inside of us, when we feel that sense of, deep ownership and pride in what we have, but a little bit more on the emotional side is, I guess really all of that we talked about. Stability is an emotional thing too, having that sense of feeling like, hey, my life's not going to be uprooted at any time because my landlord, comes to me and says, hey, I'm selling this house, I'm done, I'm out. And you got to kind of figure it out and go from there. So uh take us into a little bit more on the emotional side of things, and either things that you've seen with clients or ways that you have felt yourself.
Well, we've heard a lot. You know, I think that this comment, I've heard it multiple times, and I can attest to myself. You know, it ends up being a very, very good decision, or maybe even the best decision that they have ever made as a buyer. And that again, it just goes to multiple different angles. Mostly going to be the pride angle, but I think that there's something to be said for having the financial stability of buying a home as well. You know, having that equity in a property. And again, people that bought in, 2019, 2018, 2020, now in 2026 have a lot of different options that they can do with the equity that they have in their property. It's just the options are endless. You know, they can completely remodel their property using the equity. They can use that equity to go on a dream vacation. They can do really anything they want because it's their money. And I think that is one of the biggest things that I hear for people that bought in that time and have that equity is it's a big best decision that they've made because of the options that they've presented themselves with by just solely buying a home at the time that they did. And again, I think that you don't really understand, unfortunately, until you get into that situation. You don't really me personally, it's hard to really wrap my head around having, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 worth of equity just sitting in a home and being able to, for a lack of a better term, just play around with it, be able to do whatever you want to do with it. And again, I know we just have talked about the pride aspect of it all in this episode a lot already, but just again, you feel very prideful of having an asset that you own as a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, honestly, kind of all this spurned from, we got a comment on our one of our YouTube posts this last week, and just somebody said, "Hey, I took the leap of faith 2 years ago, bought my house, and I'm happy with the decision that I made." And it just kind of just, I guess, threw me back and I guess kind of reminded me or leveled me out in a way that this is an extremely impactful decision. And I know because of the nature of the podcast, we talk a lot about the process side of things because, ultimately our goal was to shine a light on a process that is not very talked about out there, right? So it's kind of hard to gain the information that you need in order to understand what truly goes into buying a home. And this, kind of reminded me that, there's a complete other side to it that sometimes, maybe we get a little caught up in the technicalities of it all and forget about. So, it is a large emotional decision. It is, something that is going to stir up a lot of things in you. And I was actually listening to a podcast the other day in which, the host was just talking about like the sense of pride that he felt like in just this calming nature of going home and just looking at like, dude, this house is amazing. Like, I love my house, and he was just referring to how much time do we spend at our homes. For most people, when you're not at work, most people, you spend your time at your house, right? So having that sense of this is mine, I love this, this makes me feel, stable. It makes me feel good. I feel, it draws a lot up out of you, right? When you're sitting there thinking about those things. So, I think it's just really important to take a step back and realize that there's a lot more at stake here than just, some numbers and getting an offer and getting yourself into a house.
Absolutely, and honestly, that just made me think of one of our friends, a great example of having pride in the home. They've put a ton of money into their garage space, into their a workout space in their home, and they're super prideful about it. Honestly, that they did all of that to be able to have a space that they feel comfortable in, that they want to be able to host people in, and that they want to spend time in. So I just don't think you can really put a price tag on that at the end of the day. Being able to feel really comfortable in your own space and want to be in your own space and not really want to, go anywhere else, honestly, because you don't need anything else. It's all right there for you once you get all those things done. So just thought about that example as you were talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I was talking to my mom and, they're in the middle of a renovation on their home and she's, getting the kitchen of her dreams. And, I know most of our listeners will have never been to my parents' house before, but I know Zach can attest to it. The kitchen is relatively small and, but it's been, gosh, 13, 16 years that they've, been in that home and, kind of had that space. And so it's just, she's like, oh, I just cannot wait to have everybody, home for Thanksgiving and just to, be able to host in this area and it's just going to be like an open floor plan. So, kind of everybody can mingle, without being separated by walls or feeling, you know what I mean? And it's just going to be one of those things where you can just tell, like, there's just an extreme sense of like, this is amazing. Like, I can't wait to have somebody here. I can't wait to have the family here. And I think it's really more so about, who you get to share that with as well, right? Just talking about the friend example of, hey, having people over and getting to share that space and everybody gets to be comfortable and just hang out and have that, area where, you feel good about being in. So definitely an amazing part of it. So, and then I think you kind of talked on it a little bit there, but the ripple effect of this decision, right? And here's another thing that I think is really important. I know you touched on the financial aspect of it, but I think some people, a lot of people, I've heard a lot of things, right? We've seen the posts on Facebook, hey, I made my first big girl purchase, or I made my first, adult purchase, right? And they go out and they buy this car and they buy it on their own. And again, it's stirring up that emotion of like, hey, I did this, I made this happen. And I think that's the same thing with, the home. And so I think it changes your mindset about money. I think it changes your mindset about your long-term finances. You get into a home and now it's, kind of, hey, if I do the right things on this, like you talked about, this is an asset. This is something that, has the ability to appreciate. This has the ability to turn out more money than what I have put into it. And so I think that starts to change the way that you think versus just, hey, I owe this much for rent. Let me pay this monthly payment and, move on, right? There's not really any return other than, hey, I get a place to live. Whereas in the home, you start to think about money a little bit different. You start to think about the investments that you put into the home differently, and what those can actually produce down the line for you from a financial aspect, let alone just the emotional side of having that pride of, fixing something up. And then there's, obviously discipline, remaining disciplined and making sure that you're making your payments, making sure that you're staying up, with your mortgage, and all of those different components that go into that, so, and then you can start to kind of plan for the future and what the next move looks like. And like you talked about, people that bought in 18, 19, 20, you've been in their home 5, 6, 7 years, they kind of have a lot at their disposal at this point. You could tap into the equity and, redo your home. You could buy another home or purchase an investment property, or you just never know what long-term ripple effects could potentially come from owning a home. And, again, it's probably when you're going out and looking at homes, not something you're thinking about, when you're looking at, what home I want to offer on is, hey, what is this going to do for me in 7 years? But it's something that once you actually do get in and get settled in, it's, those things start to come up a little bit more than they would.
100%. I was just going to say that, like, that's probably not, it's very underestimated in the process. You're not thinking 5, 6, 7 years down the road about having $100,000 worth of equity in your property and being able to, again, move on. You're just thinking about buying a home. Like that's all
Yeah.
really it is. That you're not thinking about the downstream effects of actually making this happen and what positives and what, kind of next opportunities because you did this one thing can come from that. And so, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Just that's not really at the forefront of really anybody's mind. And I can wholeheartedly say that for myself as well. So,
Yeah. And I mean, that's natural. I mean, I don't think, I don't know that that's necessarily a component that, is going to help you win an offer or, anything like that, is thinking 7 years down the road. But, it is just another layer to it that sometimes can be overlooked or underestimated, like you said. And so, just bringing awareness to those things, because we bring awareness to a lot that goes on in a mortgage, transaction, but bringing awareness to the things that maybe people underestimate, especially when it comes to, future planning. And maybe not seeing the full picture, for what it is, at that point in time.
absolutely. I obviously being in property management and dealing with a lot of investments on that side of things, people investing in real estate, that's always something that I'm trying to make buyers aware of, how they can get started investing in real estate might be through a primary residence to get started. But then you tap into the equity and now you're able to buy investment property and rehab that. Now you're able to tap into the equity of the investment property and buy another one and kind of just keep going down the line until you have a portfolio of, 10, 15, 20 units that's now funding a retirement whenever you decide that you want to make that happen. And so that, again, just not something that you're thinking of at the very first forefront step of buying your own first personal residence, because again, you're probably thinking about cost out of your pocket. You're thinking about, what does this home look like for me right now in this very moment. So again, just trying to bring awareness to people when they do get started, especially first time home buyers, because again, really just focused on some of the things up front, on the forefront of the process.
Yeah, no, 100%, all great points. And it's a decision that has a lot of layers to it. As you guys know, if you've been listening, we've talked a lot about the layers to it. So this is just another one, but one that hopefully is a little bit more, shine some light on the potential and, what is actually possible for you out there. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of all I got for the day. So I feel like that was quick, easy, breezy.
Touched on a lot of good points, though. Honestly, just hopefully getting people kind of excited past just the stroking of the check to get started. Because again, as we've talked about, it can feel very daunting when you see that final, cash to close number or whatever it may be, or really just the purchase price as a whole, especially in today's market, seeing how much homes are. It can be very daunting. But when you start to think about it in layers, again, like you mentioned, it gets a little bit more easier to swallow, and you start to see the more of the benefits down the road. See the things that you are going to be excited about once you do get closed, once you stroke that check and make it happen. So hopefully the people feel as excited as we did in this episode, because I felt it was palpable between the two of us for sure. So.
Yep. No, I wholeheartedly agree. So yeah, guys, well, that's all we got for you guys today. So as always, appreciate you guys tuning in, appreciate the engagement, on, all the content. If you guys are new here and you don't know, we drop episodes every Friday at noon. We drop an audio and video version on YouTube, and then also audio only on your podcast platforms, Apple and Spotify. And then also we have Instagram, Facebook, YouTube Shorts. We're posting there 3 times a week, just with little snips of content from the podcast, giving you guys a preview of what's to come. So again, appreciate all the extra love and support, and we're going to keep obviously the content coming. So I'm excited for what's to come, and appreciate you guys as always.
Absolutely, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's episode, and we will see you guys on the next one.
See ya.